I used to love Christmas. The lights, the cinnamon candles, the way snow softened even the hardest edges of our small-town maple bridge. It was the one time of year I could pretend my family was whole, warm, caring, the kind that laughed together instead of competing for air. But that illusion had cracked years ago, slowly like ice under your feet, before it breaks. This year, the crack finally gave way. It happened on Christmas Eve. I stood at the door of my parents' home holding a bag of gifts wrapped in gold paper, gifts I had spent weeks picking out for my brother Ethan's children. I had saved carefully skipped lunches, taken extra shifts because I wanted their smiles to feel like forgiveness. The house glowed from inside, warm light spilling through the frosted windows. I could hear laughter, Ethan's voice, my mother's giggle, the clink of glasses. For a moment I smiled. Maybe this Christmas would be different. But when Ethan opened the door, that hope died instantly. He did not move aside. He just leaned against the frame, his grin sharp as ever. "No place for losers tonight," he said. Behind him the tree shimmered. My mother stood by it, wineglass in hand, avoiding my eyes. My father sat in his armchair, face unreadable. No one spoke. No one defended me. For a heartbeat, I could not breathe. The cold air bit through my coat, and the bag in my hands suddenly felt heavy. I did not argue. I did not cry. I just looked at Ethan and said quietly, "You are right." Then I turned around and walked back to my car, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The laughter resumed behind me before I reached the gate. That night, I did not sleep. Growing up, I was the fixer, the reliable one, the daughter who never said no. If a bill was late, I paid it. If someone needed a ride, I dropped everything. When Ethan and his wife Hannah fell behind on their mortgage, I sent money before they even asked. I used to think it was kindness. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was habit. Or maybe I just wanted to be seen not as the single quiet sister, but as the one who held everyone together. My parents encouraged it. "You have always been the responsible one," my mother used to say, smiling in a way that looked like pride, but felt more like relief. My father rarely said anything at all. He just handed Ethan another plate, another excuse, another reason why his son's failures were someone else's fault. Over time, I stopped noticing how much I gave away. Tuition bills, daycare groceries. It all blurred together into a rhythm of giving and forgetting myself. The funny thing about generosity in my family is that it always came with a leash. They called it help, but it was really control. And every time I rescued them, I chained myself tighter to their comfort. When I got home that Christmas Eve, the apartment was dark except for the glow of the streetlights outside. I set the bag of gifts on the table and stood there for a long time staring at it. Each ribbon and tag felt like evidence proof of how desperate I had been to buy affection that was never real. I made coffee just to have something to do. The steam fogged my glasses, and I thought about Ethan's words again. No place for losers. They did not just sting. They rearranged something inside me. By the time dawn crept through the blinds, I was not crying anymore. I was calm, too calm, because for the first time in my life I understood the rules of the game I had been playing, one I never agreed to join. I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank accounts. There they were, transfer after transfer labeled Ethan's mortgage, kids' tuition, utilities. The numbers climbed like little reminders of how I had kept everyone comfortable but myself. I did not slam the laptop shut or curse. I just started ending them. Cancel. It took 5 minutes to undo 5 years of silence. And when I closed the laptop, the air around me felt different, lighter, warmer, like my apartment had been holding its breath this whole time, waiting for me to free it. I poured another cup of coffee, stood by the window, and watched the snow drift down in lazy spirals. For once, I was not thinking about who needed what or how to fix it. I was thinking about peace and how beautiful it sounded when you finally chose it. Around noon, I packed the Christmas gifts into storage boxes and taped them shut. Not because I wanted to throw them away, but because I could not look at them yet. Each bow felt like a scar. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. "Ethan, you could have at least dropped off the presents, the kids are waiting." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed a single word, "No." He replied instantly, "Ethan, what is your problem?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For years I would have apologized, explained, begged him to understand. This time I did not reply. Let him wonder. Let him sit in silence, the same silence I had lived in every holiday. By the next morning, the flood began. Calls, texts, voicemails. At first they were polite. Hey, what is going on? Then desperate, the rent is due. The kids need shoes. Finally angry. You are selfish. You have changed. I did not answer any of them. Instead, I put my phone on silent and sat by the window watching Maple Bridge turn white under the morning snow. The world looked peaceful, quiet, honest. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop again. The list of payments stretched for pages, each one a memory of how I had traded self-respect for approval. I printed them all out, the paper warm in my hands. Then I made one final call to the bank and confirmed every cancellation. When the representative said, "All done," Ms. Bennett, I smiled. The kind of smile that feels like a deep breath after years underwater. By Friday, Ethan showed up at my office. No warning. No call. He just stormed in, face red and eyes wide. "We need to talk," he hissed. My coworkers froze. I led him outside to the parking lot. He spun toward me. "You think you can just cut us off like that? The kids are suffering." "They are your kids," I said evenly. He laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Oh, so now you care about responsibility." Something inside me shifted again, but this time it was not pain. It was power. "You are right," I said calmly. "I do care about responsibility. That is why I am finally taking mine back." His jaw clenched. "You cannot do this." "I already did." I turned and walked away before he could answer. The snow crunched beneath my boots, each step louder than his anger behind me. 3 days passed before I heard from him again. When the phone rang, I almost did not answer, but curiosity won. "Clara." Ethan's voice sounded strained. "We need to talk." "About what?" "You know what?" he snapped. "You have made things impossible for us. Hannah is falling apart. The kids are confused. You used to care." "I still do," I said quietly. "That is why I stopped." He did not speak for a long moment. Then he said bitterly, "You are not the person I thought you were." I almost laughed. "No, I am not your wallet anymore." He cursed under his breath and hung up. For the first time in years, the silence that followed did not hurt. It healed. That night, I sat on the couch with the lights off, watching snow fall through the window. The world outside looked still clean, almost brand new. And I realized something simple. Something I wish I had learned sooner. Some people will only love you when you are useful. And when you stop being useful, they will call you selfish. But the truth is, boundaries are not selfish. They are survival. And for the first time in my life, I had survived Christmas. The days after Christmas were quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air is listening. I went to work, made coffee, came home, and repeated. For the first time, I was living without waiting for my phone to ring. But peace is strange when you are not used to it. It feels like something is missing, even when that missing thing is chaos. One evening, as the snow outside melted into slush, I found myself scrolling through old messages. Photos of birthdays, family dinners, the kids covered in frosting. In every picture, I was in the background smiling, always the one holding the camera, never in the center. I closed the album and leaned back in my chair. The quiet pressed against me. It was both lonely and freeing. That weekend, I decided to take a walk through Maple Bridge Park. The pond was half frozen, the benches dusted with white. Couples walked by, holding hands, children threw snowballs, dogs barked in joy. I just watched. For years, I had moved through life like a helper in someone else's story. But now the story felt like mine, even if I had no idea what came next. When I came home that evening, there was an envelope under my door. No return address. Inside was a single folded letter. It was from my mother. "Clara, we need to talk. You have hurt your brother more than you realize. Family is supposed to help each other. You are being dramatic and unkind. We raised you better than this. Call me." I read it twice. There was no apology, no question, no curiosity about how I felt. Just expectation. I set the letter on the table, poured tea, and said out loud, "No." The word felt strong in the air. The next morning, I blocked Ethan and Hannah. Then I silenced my mother's number. Not out of anger, but out of mercy for myself. At work, I threw myself into projects. My boss Daniel noticed. "You are on fire this week," he said. I smiled and said, "I just stopped putting out other people's fires." He laughed, not realizing how true it was. Weeks turned into months. One cold February night as I was cooking dinner, there was a knock on my door. For a second, my heart leapt, thinking it might be Ethan again. But when I opened it, my father stood there instead. He looked older than I remembered. His gray coat was dusted with snow, his eyes tired. "Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. He sat quietly while I made tea. When I placed the mug in front of him, he said softly, "Your mother is angry. Ethan too. They think you have abandoned us." I did not answer. He sighed. "But I know why you did it. You were drowning, and no one noticed." The words surprised me. He looked down at his hands. "I failed you. I let Ethan take too much from you because I thought you could handle it. You were always strong. I was wrong." For a moment I could not speak. The air between us was thick with everything we had never said. "Why now?" I asked finally. "Because I do not want to lose you too," he said quietly. "I came to tell you I am proud of you." The tears came fast before I could stop them. He reached across the table and took my hand. His palm was rough and warm. That night after he left, I stood by the window again, watching the streetlights reflect off the melting snow. I realized I was not angry anymore, not even hurt, just done. 2 weeks later, I received an email from Hannah. Subject line, "You destroyed our family." I almost deleted it, but curiosity won again. "Clara, you think you are better than everyone else, but you are not. You have embarrassed us. The kids miss you. How can you be so heartless after everything we did for you?" I smiled. The old me would have written back a page of apologies. This me closed the email and moved it to a folder called Lessons. That spring, I took a trip alone. A small cabin near Lake Norwell surrounded by pine trees and silence. I spent mornings walking by the water and evenings reading beside a fire. For the first time, I did not feel guilty for resting. One morning, I wrote in my journal, "Peace is not what you find. It is what you stop giving away." By summer, I had started painting again, something I had loved in college but given up because Ethan needed me to babysit, or my parents needed help with bills. The first canvas was simple, a quiet winter scene, snow falling on a small house with light in the window. When I finished, I realized it looked like my apartment. By autumn, my walls were covered in paintings. Friends came over and said, "You should sell these." I laughed at first, but then I tried. Within weeks, 3 of them sold online. The joy I felt was not about money. It was about being seen for something that was mine. One day in October, I received a message on social media. It was from my niece Emma. "Aunt Clara, I miss you. Daddy says you are mad at us. Are you?" I stared at the message for a long time. She was only 9. None of this was her fault. I replied, "Hi, sweetheart. I am not mad. I just needed time to rest. I love you very much." She sent back a heart emoji. That was all. But it was enough. That night I cried again, but it was a softer kind of crying. The kind that cleans you out from the inside. Winter came around once more. Exactly 1 year after that Christmas, I stood outside my parents' house again. This time I did not have gifts in my hands, just flowers. My father had invited me for dinner. No expectations, he had said. When he opened the door, his smile was small but real. My mother stood in the kitchen stirring soup. She looked at me, then at the floor. "You came," she said. "Yes," I said. "Just for dinner." We ate quietly. The tension was still there, but thinner. My father asked about my paintings. My mother nodded once or twice. When I left, she said softly, "Merry Christmas." Driving home, I felt lighter. Closure does not always come with apologies. Sometimes it comes with silence that no longer hurts. When I reached my apartment, I turned on the lights and saw my painting of the winter house. Snow falling light in the window, warmth inside, and I realized the house was me. The first snow fell quietly that winter. The flakes drifted through the pale light like tiny pieces of peace. I stood by the window holding a cup of tea and watching the street below. It had been almost a year since I walked away from everything that hurt. The silence in my apartment no longer scared me. It felt like safety now. Each morning began the same way. I painted for an hour before breakfast. Then I opened the windows and let the cold air remind me that I was still alive. The air tasted clean. The fear that once lived inside my chest had turned into something softer. Sometimes I still thought about Ethan and Hannah. Not with anger, just with distance. They were part of a story that had ended. When the memories came, I let them pass through me like the wind through bare trees. One afternoon, while cleaning the studio shelf, I found the old photograph of us three standing in front of our parents' house. We were smiling then. I touched the edge of the photo. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for what could have been if love had been simple, but life had chosen another shape. I placed the picture back inside a drawer and whispered a quiet goodbye again. Work at the art studio kept me busy. The children's laughter filled the rooms. Their joy was effortless and bright. They painted with wild colors, never worrying about mistakes. Watching them reminded me how healing looks when it is still innocent. Adrian often stopped by to help with supplies. He had joined as a volunteer months ago. We spoke more now, shared little things. His calm presence filled the room in a way that felt natural, not forced. One evening after class, the sun dipped behind the rooftops, painting the sky gold. We stayed behind to clean the brushes. He asked if I wanted to walk home together. I said yes. We walked along the quiet street. Snow began to fall again. I could hear our footsteps crunch against the pavement. He told me about his childhood by the sea, and how he used to watch the ships disappear into the mist. I listened and felt warmth spread through me even in the cold. When we reached my building, he smiled. He looked up at the sky and said, "The snow makes everything look new." I nodded. Maybe we are all allowed to start new too. He looked at me for a long second. Then he said, "Maybe you already have." After he left, I stood in the hallway for a while. His words stayed inside me like a small light. Days passed slowly and gently. I no longer counted them by pain, but by peace. My hands no longer shook when I painted. My laughter came back without effort. Sometimes I caught myself thinking of Adrian during quiet moments. The way he listened without trying to fix anything. The way he respected silence. It felt safe to let that kind of connection exist without fear. One Sunday morning, he invited me to visit the coast with him and a few friends from the studio. I almost said no. The old part of me still whispered that I did not belong anywhere. But I said yes. The trip took 3 hours. When we arrived, the ocean stretched endlessly ahead. The sound of waves filled the air. I stood on the wet sand, breathing in salt and wind. For a moment, I felt something lift inside me. The weight of all the years I had carried quietly started to dissolve. Adrian handed me a small seashell. He said, "Every shell has lived through storms, yet it becomes smoother each time." I turned it over in my hand. I understood. Healing does not erase the storm. It only changes the shape of what remains. We spent the day walking along the shore. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we stayed quiet. The sun sank slowly behind the water, turning everything amber. When it got dark, we sat by a small fire that someone had built. He told me that his mother used to say that love is not loud. It is steady. It stays when the noise fades. I listened to the sound of the waves and the crackle of fire. For the first time in many years, I did not feel alone. That night back at the hotel, I stood on the balcony looking at the sea. I thought about my journey, the pain, the courage, the peace that had followed. I realized that life had not punished me. It had prepared me. The next morning, we drove back. The roads were lined with frost. Adrian stopped halfway at a small cafe. We sat by the window drinking hot chocolate. He asked me what I wanted next in life. I said I just want to keep painting and feel safe. He nodded slowly. "Maybe that is enough," he said. When he smiled, I felt a quiet certainty that it was. Weeks passed after that trip to the coast. I returned home lighter, as if the wind had carried away a part of the heaviness I used to wear every day. The studio felt brighter now. Even the children noticed. One of them said, "Miss Clara, you smile more these days." I laughed softly and said, "Maybe I finally learned how." Each morning began with sunlight spilling through the curtains and the sound of birds. I painted before breakfast, and sometimes Adrian would stop by early to bring fresh coffee from the corner cafe. He always placed it quietly on the table while I worked. I liked that he never interrupted my silence. One evening, he asked if I would join him for a small art fair outside town. He said local artists would be displaying their work, and thought it might help me share my paintings with more people. The thought of crowds made me nervous, but I agreed. When the day came, I loaded my canvases carefully into the van. My heart beat fast but steady. The fair was held in a wide-open field with white tents and strings of lights. The air smelled of grass and roasted almonds. I set up my small booth beside Adrian's. He helped me hang the paintings. People wandered by, slowly admiring each piece. Some asked about the stories behind them. I told them they were about letting go and learning to breathe again. They nodded and smiled. A few bought small prints. For the first time, I felt like my art had a voice of its own. That evening, as the sun sank low, the lights above us began to glow. Music floated through the field. Adrian walked over with 2 cups of tea. We sat on a wooden bench watching people dance near the stage. He said, "You look at peace tonight." I said, "Maybe peace looks like this." He smiled and said, "You have come a long way, Clara." I said, "Maybe so." Then he said, "Sometimes distance is not escape. It is protection. You learned that the hard way." I nodded. The night air was cool but gentle. I closed my eyes and listened to laughter around us. It was strange how something as small as being understood could make life feel new again. When we packed up later, he offered to drive me home. The road was quiet. The world outside the window blurred into streaks of silver and black. I watched the trees slide past and felt the slow rhythm of his breathing beside me. There was no need for words. When we reached my apartment, I thanked him for the ride. He said, "Good night, Clara." I said, "Good night, Adrian." As he turned to leave, I felt a sudden urge to say something, but held it back. Not everything needs to be spoken to be real. In the days that followed, we grew closer, but in an unhurried way. We shared meals, sometimes painted together in the studio, and took long walks through the park near the lake. There was warmth between us, but also space. I liked that balance. One afternoon, while walking near the frozen pond, he stopped and looked at me. He said, "You still look toward the distance as if waiting for something." I said, "Maybe I am just used to expecting storms." He smiled softly. "Not every cloud means rain," he said. I wanted to believe that. That evening I painted the pond. The reflection of trees, the pale light, the faint promise of spring beneath the ice. I titled it, "Not Every Cloud." The next week brought a letter from my mother. Her handwriting was shaky. She wrote that she missed me. She said Ethan had been struggling and that the house felt empty without my visits. I read the words slowly and felt the pull of old guilt, but also a strange clarity. I realized I could love her without returning to what broke me. I placed the letter on my desk and left it unopened after the first page. Some doors can stay gently closed without anger. Later that night, I told Adrian about it. He listened quietly and said, "You can care from a distance. That is still love." I nodded. It felt true. Winter began to fade. The trees outside my window began to show thin buds. The city felt alive again. I spent more hours painting. My work had become softer, lighter, full of color. It was no longer about pain, but about what comes after. One morning, a woman from the local gallery visited the studio. She said she had seen my paintings at the fair and wanted to include my work in a small exhibition titled Renewal. I said yes with a quiet smile. The night of the exhibition, I wore a simple dress the color of sky. Adrian waited for me outside the gallery. When he saw me, he said, "You look like peace itself." I smiled. The words felt like a blessing. Inside the gallery, my paintings hung side by side. People stopped to look at them. One man said, "The light in these feels alive." Another said, "They make me feel calm." I listened from a distance and felt something bloom inside me. Adrian stood beside me, his hands folded behind his back. He said, "You gave your pain a purpose." I said, "Maybe it was the only way to let it go." After the exhibition, we walked home under the quiet night sky. The city lights flickered gently around us. I looked up and said, "It feels strange. A few years ago, I thought my life had ended. Now it feels like it is just beginning." He said, "Maybe endings are just corners where light changes direction." I smiled. His words always carried peace. At my door, he paused and looked at me. He said, "Clara, I want to tell you something, but only if you are ready to hear it." I said, "I'm listening." He took a slow breath. He said, "I care for you deeply. Not out of pity, but because you make the world feel steady again. You do not need to answer. I just wanted you to know." For a moment, I stood still. My heart beat quietly in my chest. I did not feel fear. I only felt warmth. I said, "Thank you, Adrian. I am not afraid of care anymore." He smiled. "That is enough for now," he said. When he left, I stood by the door and let his words settle inside me. I realized that love does not always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes softly like evening light slipping through curtains. That night I slept peacefully. For the first time in many years, I dreamed not of loss, but of possibility.